Your grocery cart costs $347. 3 years ago, the exact same items cost $180. You're not buying anything extra. You've actually cut back. But somehow, you're spending twice as much and eating worse. Your rent just increased again. Your landlord apologized, blamed property taxes, said there's nothing he can do. You're now spending 52% of your take-home pay on housing. Financial experts say you shouldn't spend more than 30%. You crossed that line 2 years ago and you're never going back. Last month, your car needed repairs. $1,200. You put it on a credit card because your emergency fund, the one you spent 5 years building, got wiped out by medical bills last year. You make more money now than you ever have. Your salary has increased. On paper, you're doing better. But you can't afford the life your parents had on half the income. You're working harder, earning more, and drowning slowly. And every expert on television tells you the economy is strong. That inflation is moderating. That things are getting better. But your bank account tells a different story. And that story is getting worse. This is the elite economics, where every video will change how you see money, history, and the systems controlling your life. What I'm about to show you isn't taught in schools, isn't discussed by central bankers, and explains exactly why your paycheck buys less every single month. If you've ever felt like you're working harder just to fall further behind, this is why. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let me ask you something. When you fill up your gas tank, buy groceries, pay your bills, do you feel like the government's inflation numbers match your reality? They say 3%. Your life says 30%. Drop a comment and tell me what's hit you hardest. Rent? Food? Healthcare? Because what you're experiencing has a name. And it's not happening by accident. Here's what's actually happening, and why 2026 marks the point where the middle class crosses from struggling to disappearing. When the Federal Reserve creates new money, trillions of dollars conjured from nothing, that money doesn't appear in your bank account. It doesn't get distributed evenly. It enters the economy at the top. Banks get it first. They lend it to large corporations at near zero interest rates. Those corporations buy back their stock. Wealthy investors use cheap borrowed money to buy real estate, to buy assets, to buy anything that holds value. And here's the key, they're buying these assets with new money before prices have risen. They're getting in early. Then, slowly, over months and years, that money ripples through the economy. Businesses raise prices because their costs are rising. Landlords raise rents because they can. Corporations raise prices because everyone else is. By the time any of that new money reaches you in the form of a salary increase, if it reaches you at all, prices have already doubled. You're getting paid in money that's worth half what it was. The wealthy bought assets when they were cheap using money that was fresh. You're buying necessities when they're expensive using money that's been devalued. This has a name. It's called the Cantillon Effect, identified nearly 300 years ago. The closer you are to the source of new money creation, the more you benefit. The further away you are, the more you're destroyed. Wage earners are always the furthest away. The middle class is always last in line. And last in line means you're not climbing the ladder. You're paying for everyone else to climb it. If this sounds theoretical, let me show you what it looks like when this process runs to completion. Weimar Germany, 1923. After World War I, Germany owed crushing war reparations. Debts it couldn't pay. So the government did exactly what governments always do when they're drowning in debt. They printed money. At first, just a little. Then more. Then constantly. Workers were paid twice a day because money lost half its value by nightfall. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January cost 200 billion marks by November. Families burned cash in their fireplaces because it was cheaper than buying firewood. And the middle class was annihilated. Not the industrialists who owned factories. Not the landowners who owned property. Those assets held their value. It was the teachers, the engineers, the civil servants, everyone who had saved money, who had pensions, who had built their lives through wages. Their savings became worthless. Their pensions evaporated. An entire social class disappeared in less than 2 years. This wasn't a natural disaster. It was policy. The government chose to print. The middle class paid the price. And the social chaos that followed created the conditions for extremism that tore Europe apart. You might think that was Germany, a century ago, after a world war. Surely that couldn't happen in America. Except it already did. 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's last connection to gold. For the first time in American history, the currency was backed by nothing except trust in the government. The printing presses turned on. And they never turned off. The 1970s brought something economists said was impossible. Stagflation. The economy stagnated while prices exploded. Inflation hit 14%. Interest rates hit 20%. The middle class got crushed. And here's what most people don't realize. Before 1971, one middle-class income could buy a house, support a family, save for retirement, and pay for college. One income. After the inflation of the 1970s, that became impossible. Suddenly both parents had to work to achieve what one income used to provide. And even with two incomes, the standard of living declined. Real wages, adjusted for actual purchasing power, peaked in 1973. That was 53 years ago. You are earning less in real terms than your grandparents did on a single income. Not because you're less educated. Not because you work less hard. But because every dollar you earn is worth a fraction of what it used to be. The 1970s proved inflation could destroy the American middle class. And we learned nothing. Which brings us to now. To 2026. To why everything feels like it's accelerating. In 2020 and 2021, the US government printed more money in 24 months than it had printed in the previous 200 years combined. Not an exaggeration. Actually more. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet exploded from $4 trillion to $9 trillion. Trillions created from nothing, pumped into the system. They called the inflation that followed transitory. A temporary blip. Supply chain issues. It would resolve itself. They were lying. Or incompetent. Either way, wrong. By 2022, inflation was undeniable. By 2024, it was entrenched. In 2026, we're living through the acceleration phase. The phase where it stops being theoretical and starts breaking lives. Asset prices have exploded. The wealthy have doubled their net worth. The median home price has become completely detached from median income. A house that cost 3 times the average salary in 1970 now costs 8 times the average salary. You cannot save fast enough to keep up with housing price inflation. Meanwhile, your grocery bill has legitimately doubled. Shrinkflation hides half of it. Your cereal box is 20% smaller for the same price. Your ice cream container has a divot in the bottom. Your chip bag is 60% air. The official CPI says inflation is 3.2%. Your actual lived experience says 25%. And that gap, that difference between what the government claims and what you're actually experiencing, that's where your future is being stolen. The government has $35 trillion in debt it can never repay. The only way out is inflation. Print money, devalue the currency, pay back debt with dollars that are worth less than when they were borrowed. It's not a bug. It's the plan. And you are the collateral damage. Here's the part they don't say out loud. This isn't an accident. Inflation is not some unfortunate side effect of well-meaning policy. It is the policy. Because inflation does exactly what the powerful need it to do. It transfers wealth from people who work for money to people who own assets. It liquidates government debt by destroying the currency. It punishes savers and rewards borrowers. And the government is the biggest borrower in human history. Every % of inflation reduces the real value of what they owe. Your destroyed purchasing power is their debt relief. Your inability to afford a house is their fiscal strategy. The middle class isn't collateral damage. The middle class is the target. Because there aren't enough billionaires to tax. There aren't enough corporations to squeeze. The real wealth, the aggregate wealth that can be silently confiscated through currency debasement, sits in the middle. Your wages. Your savings. Your retirement accounts. That's what gets sacrificed. Not through legislation. Not through taxes you can see and fight. Through inflation. Silent. Relentless. Politically deniable. Weimar Germany proved it could destroy a society. The 1970s proved it could happen in America. And 2026 is proving it's happening again, faster, and more completely than ever before. The mathematics don't negotiate. They don't care about fairness or intentions. They simply execute. And they're executing the middle class right now. If this changed how you see what's happening to your bank account, subscribe. Because what comes next is going to be worse. And the only defense is understanding exactly what they're doing to you. The elite economics. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look,